Wow. Hey, this is the chair guy. And when I used to watch Eric Johnson play, it would just melt my brain. It didn't melt my face off, it melted my brain. I would watch Yngwie Malmsteen, Steve Vai, and then, of course, I got into Alan friggin' Holdsworth. I won't pretend to know what any of them were doing. I still don't understand what they're doing. But what I did know was that they played up and down the fretboard like it was nothing. The notes were just putty in their hands, and the music just seemed to kind of come out of nowhere. When I looked at the fretboard, this is what I saw. And I know some people probably relate to this. All you see is this little 4-fret section, and there's black above and below, and you feel like if you go beyond that point, you're just going to float off into space or something. And even when I learned a second box to put on top of it, I felt like I was just shifting from position to position. I wasn't floating freely over those two shapes. And the reason I say that these players melted my brain, not my face, was because even though I certainly appreciated their ability to shred, what really blew me away about it was the fact that they seemed to be able to play out from any note on the fretboard on an instrument that seemed so utterly illogical to me. Now, one method you can use to play that freely on the fretboard is the 3 notes per string method. So I'm going to show you some different ways to use it, why it's incredibly cool, and then I'm going to show you exactly why I don't actually use it. Or at least not exactly. If we look at the entire fretboard as a grid of lettered notes, it looks incredibly random and chaotic. So let's highlight just the notes from a single key. In this case, the key of G major. So these are going to be all the notes associated with the diatonic scale. In other words, all 7 notes, not just the 5-note pentatonic scale. Now, if we took this entire grid of red notes and slid it down a single fret, we would have all the notes for G sharp. And if we slid it down again, we would have all the notes for A major. But in this position, it's all the notes for the scales of G major and also all of the notes for E minor, because E minor is the relative minor for G. If you don't know what that means, don't worry. It doesn't really matter to this lesson. Just know that these are all the notes that we want to use and we need to make sense of them. So we're going to use the 3 notes per string system. And the 3 notes per string system is just a group of 3 shapes which are all 2-string symmetrical shapes. In other words, all 3 of them have got 1, 2, 3 notes that are right beside 1, 2, 3 other notes. They're just in 3 different configurations. Figuration 1 is probably the hardest of the 3 just because they're so far apart. However, you can play this in 2 different ways. You can either play them kind of the way the shape is, or you can break it up into little chunks of 2. The second shape is actually pretty simple because it only covers 4 frets. So we can play these 6 notes fairly easily. And then the third shape is kind of an inversion of the second shape. It's just flipped over, and you play these 6 notes. On the fretboard, it's going to look something like this. Now, these shapes can actually be arranged in different ways, but the way they're arranged right here, shape 3 would actually be right beside shape 2 if it weren't for the B string, which is sliding it down a single fret. So for instance, if we were to stretch this across the fretboard, and I haven't filled in up here just because the shapes would be going off the fretboard, but you can see how they can be arranged to fill in everything. This shape right here is of course the same one I was showing you before, and this shape down here is actually the exact same shape. It's just being slid over a single string, and of course because of the B string it's warping things a little. So this shape, shape number 3, is right here, but it's getting warped slightly because one side is being pushed down a single fret. And once you get these 3 shapes down really well, you can start linking them in some interesting ways by making 4-note shapes. So for instance, if I take shape number 1 and I slide it down over part of shape number 2, I actually get a 4-note shape, and these are the same notes. G, C, A, D, B, and E are also right here as well. The only confusing thing about shape number 1 is it exists in more than one place on the fretboard, because if we slide it over just one note, we actually get another shape number 1, which can be confusing. Fortunately, this isn't true for shape number 2 and shape number 3 because they only go one place. Like if I take shape number 2 and put it on top of shape number 1, I get a 4-note pattern. If I take shape number 3 and put it on top of shape number 2, I get another 4-note pattern. And so these can just be moved around in different ways to link everything up. Something a lot of people may not realize about the 3 notes per string system is that you don't necessarily have to break the fretboard up into all 3 shapes. For instance, you could break it all up into shape number 1. As you can see, when it crosses the B string, you're still going to get this warped shape with shape number 1, but that's going to be true of all 3 of them. And because all 3 only have 6 notes in the shape, you're always going to lose a single note. So for instance, with shape number 1, you're going to lose the F sharp, which is going to be the major 7th or the minor 2nd. If we break it down into shape number 2, then we see that we lose the E, which is unfortunate because that is the minor root. With shape number 3, we can see that we just lose the D. And so this is just a way that you can actually mix and match and treat the fretboard in a number of different ways depending on how you arrange these shapes. Now, if you're just wanting to play notes from the scale, in other words, you're not necessarily caring what the notes are, what context they have, which ones are the roots, which ones are the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, you can just use this pattern to just play notes from the key. But obviously, if you want to do a lot of things, you need to know the context. Now, to know the context, we need to know the roots. So here I've put red around the major root and blue around its relative minor. So now we know that because these are sequential, this is going to be our 1st, then our 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, back to our 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and of course down the high E string. And if you're playing in minor, we will start out with this note of the pattern. This will be your 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and on down the high E string. So in short, you just have to memorize where your roots are and where your 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th is. And you have to do that for all 3 of these shapes. And that is really my only problem with the 3 notes per string system, and it's why I don't exactly use it. So now I'm going to show you what I do. Instead of breaking down the fretboard into 3 different shapes, I break it down into only one shape, which I call the throne, which is just the diatonic version of the chair system, which only has 5 notes. And because all of these thrones are identical, in other words, they have all the same notes in them, then I always know that if I'm playing in major, this will always be the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and the 7th will be the top of the next throne. If I'm playing in minor, I know that the 1st will always be in this position, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and back to my 1st. And what I do is I run this in the background. In other words, this is what I'm always seeing in my head so that I can know the context, and then if I want to, I can play other shapes over it in order to connect all of these shapes. So for instance, I might use shape number 1. Because if I take this shape and I slide it down to this position where it also exists, because I don't have that other note up there, I know it's different because I'm still seeing the thrones, and so I still know I've got my fifth and my first and my sixth and my second and my seventh and my third, even though the shape is the same. I see it differently because I see it as crossing thrones. Shape number 2 is going to work right here. If I want, I can combine these shapes by putting shape number 1 here and then shape number 2 here, because all of these 3 notes per string shape are all part of my thrones. And so no matter what, this is the context I'm seeing in the background, and I'm just laying other shapes over it and using those shapes to connect it and make 4-note shapes and 5-note shapes and whatever else I need to do to play, but I still know the context. So everything I've showed you about the 3 notes per string system is still going to be true with the chair system, in this case the thrones, but you're better able to keep track of where you are on the fretboard. In other words, where your roots are and where your other scale degree numbers are. And so it allows you to always remain in context when you're playing. Or at least that's how it works best for my head. So when I'm moving over the fretboard like this, what I'm actually seeing in my head is this. I'm pulling the 3 notes per string shapes out of this one single shape, so I don't really see it as the 3 notes per string system, but the shapes are similar, and of course I can extend those into any other shapes I want. And more importantly for me anyway, I always keep the context. I always know where the scale degrees are, so I can figure out what I'm really trying to play. And then of course I try to forget all of that and move it into my subconscious and not think about it, if that makes any sense. And that all brings me back to the players I was talking about at the beginning of this video. Because even though, I mean, they're so far above me in playing ability, but what inspires me about them is the fact that they don't seem to see positions, or at least it doesn't appear that they do. They just seem to be able to play out from any root on the fretboard. And it seems to give them just utter flexibility. And this is what really, really inspired me, particularly about the way Alan Holdsworth seemed to see things.
Well, I guess in the beginning I wanted to learn how to improvise. I was always interested in that.
Much like myself, he was more interested in improvising, and he saw things more like this.
So I guess I started out trying to figure everything out by using math.
And this.
For the transposing nature of stringed instruments, you can transpose real easy, which something you can't do on other instruments. When I think of that scale, I don't think of it as starting on D. I think of it as it starts at the lowest available note on my instrument, which would be an E, and the highest available note, which would be another E.
And he seemed to see the fretboard like this.
What you see here is all the note of a C major scale all at once.
And so the structure, the overall structure, was more like this.
And that's basically how I see scales. I see them from the lowest note to the highest note. So it's just up to me to juggle the notes around and improvise and make melodies out of them.
And he saw things like this.
I don't learn any particular licks or something that I can just play, so I'm stringing a bunch of licks together, because that's not the way I think about improvising. I just think, again, about all of the notes, that are available. And you just try and make melodies out of them, and don't let your hands dictate what you think you can do. Take a look at those fingerboard charts and imagine your eyes like dancing on the notes that you want to play.
And even though I don't even pretend to understand what he's doing, because Alan Holdsworth is a jazz player, I'm not a jazz player, I don't have anywhere near that sophistication of playing, but somehow just the way he sees the fretboard and sees playing and sees improvising is something I grok. And for me, that's just kind of the ultimate thing. That's what I want to do, is be flexible as I possibly can on the fretboard so that I can do interesting things on it and improvise as openly as possible, if that makes any sense. So for me, the chair system just really helps me do it. And remember, guys, if you check out my website, musicalchairsystem.com, you can get diagrams and stickers and even a free diagram.